Don't look now. It probably snuck up on you just like it snuck up on me, but Tennessee football is going to be in action this week. No, not at Neyland Stadium, but spring practice begins on Friday. 3 of the biggest questions for Tennessee football this spring. All that and more to Tuesday, Locked On Vols.
You are Locked On Vols, your daily podcast on the Tennessee Volunteers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, good Tuesday morning, everybody. Welcome into Locked On Vols. I am your host, Eric Cain. Can't thank you enough for being here, making Locked On Vols your first listen, your first watch each and every single morning. Every dayers, couldn't do the show without you. I'm going to answer some of your mailbag questions in segment number 3. Tennessee basketball moving on up in the polls. ESPN's latest bracketology. What needs to happen for Tennessee to secure a double bye in the SEC tournament? And, of course, the number one overall seed or number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. That's coming up in segment 2. But the big 3 questions I have for Tennessee football entering spring practice this week. That's the show layout here today. And, again, we'll answer your mailbag questions coming up later on. Appreciate you guys for sending those in. And let's get going. Tennessee football, I mean, these are things we've talked about repeatedly over the offseason already. But, again, I'm in baseball mode right now, right? You know, like in my work, it's from July, mid-July on all the way through like the start of February. It's football, with a little bit of baseball sprinkled in. But once Tennessee baseball starts, man, I'm full go baseball over at the stadium. Like this week, I'm going to be over there 5 days a week because they have 2 midweek games. So I haven't really been thinking much about football, lately. And it did not dawn on me until, I want to say yesterday, the Tennessee football spring practice is happening starting on Friday. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there covering, seeing what everybody says and the little bit of practice access that we get. And I just feel like it's kind of snuck up on everybody. And there's a bigger question to be had about what will spring practice look like in years to come. We know spring games, for the most part, are going out the wayside. What will Tennessee do in that regard? Will we ever get to a future where OTAs are the model? I hope so. I think spring practice is premature for teams playing in the college football playoff. Some teams are playing on into the end of January, and then you're starting spring practice, beginning of March. That's just not enough time off. So my hope is down the road it goes to OTAs. But nonetheless, spring practice is happening right now, a chance to get eyes, video, pictures, footage, opinions of these new guys, kind of what these guys look like on the gridiron. And I've got, like you, I've got plenty of questions that I want to see answered. And they're probably not going to be answered over spring, but here are the questions that I'm going to be looking for. Number 1 for me, who the heck's going to play center? And really, what I said that weird, really, what does the offensive line look like? Gone is Cooper Mays. Gone is Javonte Spraggins. Gone is John Campbell, Dane Davis. Gone is Andre Keurig. I mean, those were pretty much, 4 of those starters, pretty much 5 with Dane Davis in there. He was a part-time starter last year. They're all gone. Lance Hurd, who arguably was your worst offensive lineman last year between him and John Campbell, is your lone returner. And I think he's going to be better. I think he's such a better football player. He played well at times last year, but he does need to take a step, big step. He's your returner, and I think that he will take a step. But there's going to be 4 new spots you got to fill. And we know about Sam Pendleton. We know about Wendell Moy. Those guys will come in here. They're going to play. They're going to fit in there somewhere. Will William Satterwhite step up and be the center? Will Sam Pendleton be the center this spring and Satterwhite try to play some guard? Will Jesse Perry, Max Anderson step up and play that other guard? David Sanders, true freshman, obviously can't wait to get eyes on him. He's kind of penciled in as your starting right tackle. Of course, you need to make sure that he's ready to go come fall. But, I mean, they're not playing games this Saturday. But there's just so much newness on the offensive line that I'm going to be paying attention to this year. And I think we're going to get a glimpse of what it exactly can look like. And, if Tennessee can kind of continue to lead the torch and rushing in the SEC and obviously protecting Nico Iamaleava, that's going into a contract year. But more importantly, it's going into a year where he needs to improve as well for your offense to get back on track. So the offensive line, I'm going to be looking at that. That probably isn't leading your list because offensive line play is not sexy. What is sexy is skill players, wide receivers, long, explosive plays down the field, right? And Tennessee absolutely has the biggest turnover of any position at wide receiver. We know this. So number 2 on my list, who the heck is going to be in that group? Who the heck is going to lead the charge Okay, it's got to be Mike Matthews. Mike Matthews flirted with the transfer portal a little bit. He's back. He's got to take a step. He's got all the potential in the world, does the 5-star. Chris Brazzell has got to have a year or two like Dante Thornton had in the system. Needs to stay on the field more than Dante Thornton did. And Brazzell was pretty durable for the most part last year. He just didn't produce, but he's got to produce. Braylon Staley in the slot. He finished the year playing an awful lot of football, but didn't play. He didn't pretty much about it. He did redshirt last year, but did get some experience late. How much better is Braylon Staley now in his second year in the system? This time last year, Braylon Staley was, all the talk of spring practice, right? It wasn't Mike Matthews, it was Braylon Staley, if you remember. So those three guys, Amari Jefferson, are you on a pitch count? What's your availability? How much can you do coming off a hip procedure in November, I believe? I'm pretty sure he's going to be limited big time. And then these freshmen coming in, Radarius Jackson and Travis Smith, man, what do you look like, and how quickly can you help? So much inexperience at this group at wide receiver, and from a numbers perspective, there's just not a whole lot there. So obviously, everybody's going to be looking at the wide receivers this spring as well, and who's going to take a step, and can any of these young guys play a little bit? I mean, I remember the first spring practice that Squirrel White was here, and Josh Heupel mentioned him several times, and he wasn't a starter the next year because Jalen Hyatt was in the slot, but he played a little bit. When he got in the game, he made a huge impact. So obviously everybody's going to be looking at the wide receivers as well. Number 3, cornerback. When we're talking inexperience at wide receiver, there's going to be a lot of inexperience at corner as well, because like wide receiver, you don't have a whole lot of numbers. You don't have a whole lot of depth there. And number 1, when we're talking wide receivers, is number 1 going to be out there? Ricky Gibson. Is Ricky Gibson going to be out there? Said last week that he leaked it to the media, to On3's national guys, that he plans to enter the transfer portal. I mean, I don't think there's any slam dunk guarantees that he's going to be at spring practice. I would assume that he will be, but I mean, that's the first thing I'm going to be doing on Friday, is going out there and making sure the number 1's out there, going through workouts and going through practice. But Ricky Gibson, his whole situation kind of as a sidebar. Jalen McMurray's stepping up because Jamal McCoy is out with an injury. But what do you have behind those guys? And more than anything, if Ricky does leave, if Gibson does leave, I mean, you're looking at 2 brand new cornerbacks to begin the year, most likely. I know what you have in McMurray, but, Caleb Beasley, some of these younger guys like Trey Poteet, I mean, who's going to step up at cornerback as well? Again, a lot of inexperience out on the perimeter at both sides of the football. That's not ideal, but that's what spring practice is all about, to where you can work through those things and gain some valuable reps that you can carry on into fall camp and hopefully onto the football field. But with these positions specifically, it's like you don't have a whole lot of numbers to begin with, so they're going to have to play. Tennessee's absolutely going to go in the spring transfer portal window, try to get a corner, try to get a wide receiver. I don't think they're going to get 4 or 5 guys, but I think 2 to 3 guys wouldn't be shocking, just where those rooms are right now numbers-wise. You're entering this spring, Brent Hubbs is going to say this on the VolQuest podcast on Tuesday. You're entering this spring with probably as many, if not more, questions. No, let me rephrase it. You're entering this spring with as many questions, with more questions than you've ever have outside of that first spring when Josh Heupel was here, when everything was new. What's the offense going to look like? What's the quarterback play going to be in here? Like, there was tons of questions about tempo and all that first spring that Josh Heupel's here. But outside of that spring, you're entering this spring with more questions than you ever had. Offensive line questions, wide receiver questions, cornerback questions, quarterback questions in terms of, can Nico take that step? There's a whole lot of questions to be answered right now. And so, we'll see how many of those do get answered. But those are the big 3 for spring practice beginning on Friday: offensive line play, wide receiver play, and cornerback play. So I'm going to be watching those position groups like a hawk all over spring practice and seeing if there's any production and development there. So those are some big questions, and I still think Tennessee is going to be a pretty good team next year, but spring is a very important time, and if it's not spring, it's OTAs. I mean, these camp-like settings are huge for development, and there's a lot of guys that need to develop for the University of Tennessee. We'll continue throughout the week. We'll continue to preview spring practice and hit on some high notes leading into the first practice on Friday. Who are some guys that need to step up on offense? Who are some guys that need to step up on defense? And have great springs. That's coming up as we continue on this week on Locked On Vols. But next, a lot of Tennessee basketball conversation. Still reeling in the excitement of Jemai Mashak's game-winning 3 over Alabama. Will Tennessee be a number 1 seed? What needs to happen? That's coming up next as we continue here with this Tuesday Locked On Vols. Hey guys, I want to tell you about our friends over at SupplyHouse. Get the supplies you need from the site for the skilled trades. That is SupplyHouse. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, SupplyHouse is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? SupplyHouse offers expert support and industrial leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for the trade pros looking for extra edge, their free Trademaster program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. That thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trademaster program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, electrical supplies in just a few clicks. Plus, use the promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's SH5 for 5% off your first order. All that and more is at supplyhouse.com. Tennessee knocked off Alabama 79-76 Saturday. We talked about it in a post-game reaction podcast. If you haven't listened to that or watched that, I encourage you to go back and check that out. I was in my hotel room in downtown Houston, Texas, watching the end of that game, and I decided to do a little post-game podcast because it was that big of a deal, right? I mean, Tennessee wins at the buzzer, Jemai Mashak, and certainly Tennessee stole the college basketball world, the landscape, and all the conversations, social media conversations and engagements. That was on Saturday night. So what does this kind of look like now with Tennessee sitting at, a 24-5 record? Last week of the regular season on the road at Ole Miss and then back home against South Carolina. And certainly all that leading into the SEC tournament that's set to take place next weekend. Real quick before we get into kind of where Tennessee is in these rankings and seedings, you've got Tennessee that moved up one spot in both the AP and coaches poll to number 4. Somehow, Tennessee basketball dropped in the net rankings from 4th to 5th. Not sure how that works, but it did. Ken Palm has Tennessee still at number 5, and Tennessee still the number 1 defensive efficiency team in the country. It did drop 3 spots to number 27 offensive efficiency team in the country. However, Tennessee did move up back to the number 1 seed line, according to ESPN's Joe Lunardi, the bracketologist. It was the 4th number 1 seed. This was Sunday night after Tennessee's win over Alabama the day before. Auburn, Duke, and Houston are the top 3 number 1 overall seeds, while Alabama dropped to the top number 2 seed. Florida is the number 6 overall seed. That is on that 2 seed line. Lunardi now has Tennessee as the number 1 seed in the West region. So go ahead and start packing your bags and saving all the coupons you can to save some money for that trip out to the West Coast, right? The West region paired with number 2 Iowa State, number 3 Wisconsin, number 4 Texas A&M. Man, it was just a couple weeks ago. Everybody was talking about Texas A&M being like the number 2 team in the SEC. Tennessee went on the road and beat them, and since then they haven't been anywhere close. Alabama dropped to the number 5 seed in the Midwest. Overall seed in the Midwest, and number 1 Houston, and number 3 Michigan, and number 4 Kentucky. Ooh, that looks brutal right there. That looks brutal. Alabama dropped to number 5 overall in the Midwest with number 1 Houston, so Alabama in this simulation will be paired with Houston, the 3rd seed Michigan, and 4th seed Kentucky. Man, I wouldn't want any part of that. That is a brutal draw, so even more incentive to hang on to this number 1 seed. Auburn, in this latest projection, Sunday night by Joe Lunardi, number 1 seed in the South, number 2 seed Michigan State, 3 seed St. John's, 4 seed Arizona. Duke is the 1 seed in the East, 2 seed Florida, 3 seed Texas Tech, 4 seed Purdue. From a name perspective, that region looks pretty tough. Duke 1, Florida, we know what Florida's capable of if it's on. Texas Tech, and then Purdue. Of course, Tennessee met with Purdue in the Elite Eight last year. But if you saw a projection like this, the West region, Tennessee being that 1 seed paired with Iowa State, Wisconsin, and A&M as the top 4 seeds, I would take that. I would take that for sure. If it meant, being in a region that is farther away from home, but you had an easier path, 100%, sign me up. I don't care about that. I'm not going to these games anyway. Sign me up for that in a heartbeat. So that's kind of the latest right now. And again, these are nothing but projections. Joe Lunardi is not the end-all be-all, so I'm not trying to make it out that way. But he does have the biggest platform to do this. There are other, bracketologists out there. Jerry Palm, CBS Sports, is just one of a few, or several, and they have their own platforms, but nothing's like ESPN in this regard. So that's why Joe Lunardi is just continuously repeated in these conversations. But again, Tennessee up to the number 1 seed line as the 4th team as the number 1 seed. This is the latest projection. So what does Tennessee need to do to hold on to that number 1 seed? Well, I'm not saying Tennessee has to win every single game left is going to play, but I certainly think Tennessee needs to win these last 2 regular season games, right? There's some talk out there that you can maybe split or whatever, but Ole Miss is not very good. That's a team that you should beat on the road. South Carolina is playing decent basketball right now, but that's a team you better beat at home. So go ahead and win these last 2 games in the regular season, and then sure, just have a pulse right in the SEC tournament. If you handle business here in the last week of the regular season, Tennessee needs just 1 win this week to clinch a spot in the top 4, which means a double bye for the SEC tournament. So if you just have a pulse this week, or in the SEC tournament, then surely you can hang on to that number 1 seed, right? Win a game, don't get embarrassed, all that and more. But yeah, Tennessee currently right now number 5 in the AP poll, number 4 in the AP poll. It's coming off a 79-76 win over Alabama. It's going to Ole Miss, who is 20-9, 9-7. That's the late game, by the way. So go ahead and get your coffees ready, an afternoon nap. South Carolina, the regular season finale at home. That'll be senior day at the Food City Center. Because Tennessee beat Alabama, I'm sure you saw on social media, Bruce Pearl tweeted out #VFL, #WarEagle. You saw the video clip of Auburn, the players watching on the bus on the way home. Jabbar Meshach's game-winning buzzer, and they got up and they were singing Rocky Top. Kind of weird, but kind of cool at the same time. You know what I'm saying? Like, if I'm an Auburn fan, I'm like, what are you guys singing? That's gross. But if I'm a Tennessee fan, I'm like, okay. That's kind of neat when an opposing team in your league is singing your fight song. But they did clinch the SEC's regular season championship with its win at Kentucky on Saturday and, Tennessee's win over Alabama. Florida and Alabama are tied for 2nd in the conference with 12-4 records. The 2 teams are going to be meeting in Tuscaloosa on Wednesday night. So, we talked about the ending stretch here this season for Alabama just being brutal. Tennessee hosting Florida, and then, of course, playing Auburn in the second round of the Iron Bowl basketball edition next weekend. Florida hosts Ole Miss. Florida should be able to handle that. That's on Saturday. And then again, as I mentioned, Alabama will go to Auburn to close the regular season. So right now, Tennessee's 4th in the league standings, 11-5 record, 1 game ahead of Missouri. Missouri did lose to Tennessee earlier in the season, lost in overtime at Vanderbilt on Saturday. Tennessee holds the tiebreaker over Missouri as well because of winning that game in early February. There's a scenario where Tennessee could finish as high as number 2 in the SEC. Alabama and Florida all have to finish at 13-5, which would require Alabama and Florida going 1-1 this week and Tennessee going 2-0. So that's very possible, but it's possible, but probably unlikely. So those are kind of all the different scenarios. At the end of the day, Tennessee just needs to win these 2 games and, in my opinion, win a game in the SEC tournament, and you should be fine to hold on to that number 1 seed. That's just my opinion. A lot of things can happen. What does Alabama do? If Alabama wins at Auburn to end the regular season, maybe that changes a little bit, obviously, because we know how high in caliber in terms of people think about Auburn this year and where they are in all these rankings and metrics. So just do you, and you should be all right. We're talking about all this because Tennessee's never been a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament ever. So that's a big deal. Sure, you want to win it all. Like, all this doesn't matter unless you go and win some games. I recognize that, but that's still a big deal. You've never been a number 1 overall seed. You've never reached the Final Four. Maybe both of those things can happen this year, with wins like you had over Alabama at home on Saturday when you were not playing your best basketball. Your two big men in the starting five combined for 8 points. Your star player, Zakai Ziegler, sat for 10 minutes in the first half. You had Alabama that shot 54% from the field in the first half. Sears went off for 24 points. Tennessee got out-rebounded, got bullied on the boards, specifically on the offensive end as well. All those things went wrong, yet you found a way to win it when it mattered because you have a defense that showed up in the second half. So all this is fun, but right now, hey, Tennessee is not locked in, but currently situated on the 1 seed line. It's that fourth number 1 team. What can it do to hold on to it? Just take care of you and finish off the regular season the right way. Win one game in the SEC tournament. That is my formula for it, but of course we'll have to see. A lot of questions about Tennessee baseball. One question about the 2025 versus 2026 quarterback recruiting cycle. All that and more is coming up next as we continue on here. It's Tuesday, Locked On Vols. Every dayers, this time of the show is for you every single Tuesday in the offseason, in the football offseason. Typically, we just do one segment, and it's segment number 3 on Tuesday. But if we get enough questions, man, we'll do 2 segments, maybe 3 segments. But it's when you guys can ask me anything, and we'll start with a YouTube question. I did not write the handle, so I apologize. But I want to know, do you think we, the Vols, passed on Deuce Knight to guarantee Faison Brandon QB1? I don't know if you I'm sure you know this, but Deuce Knight, of course, is in the class of 2025. Faison Brandon, the Tennessee commit, is class of 2026. No, I do not think that they passed on Deuce Knight to guarantee Faison Brandon being QB1. I don't think Josh Heupel recruits that way. I know Tony Vitello does not recruit that way. Like, you don't guarantee anybody anything. You guarantee an opportunity. Like, you can guarantee an opportunity for said player to come in and compete, but I don't think you're just handing anybody starting jobs. Now, having said that, you have so much money and resources invested in a guy like David Sanders, probably going to play. But in terms of Deuce Knight to Faison Brandon or whatever, I don't think anything was guaranteed. Also, I think when they evaluated Deuce Knight, they like George McIntyre. George McIntyre is the quarterback that took in the class. I understand he's in state. At one point in time, Deuce Knight was in state as well. But George McIntyre was the pick for that class of 2025. Tennessee targeted him early, got him committed early, and boom, now he's signed. Same with Faison Brandon. Faison Brandon was the pick for the Vols in the class of 2026. He committed to Tennessee last August and is committed right now. I think Tennessee's Tennessee's in great shape there. I'm not trying to, start rumors or anything, but until signing day happens, like North Carolina's got some momentum going on right now with Bill Belichick. And of course, Faison Brandon's one of the top rated recruits in all of college football for the class of 2026. So, but to answer your question, no, I do not think that was the case whenever they were trying to, evaluate Faison Brandon and, Deuce Knight. All right, let's continue on. We'll go to my inbox here on @_Cainer. All right, let's see here. This is from Ross. Ross says, Ray Mears has the most wins in Tennessee history with 278. How far behind is Barnes, and is that something on his radar? I'm not going to sit here and act like I know Rick Barnes on a personal level because I do not. I do not cover the team. I've spoken with Barnes several times, and he's awesome, and he's super, super nice. But I'm not going to sit here and act like I know him on that level. But I feel like I could say I don't think that he's even paying attention to that in the slightest, right? Rick Barnes has 226 wins while being at the University of Tennessee right now. Yes, that puts him second in Tennessee coaching history, behind Ray Mears. I'm sorry, I'll get back to this in a moment. I'm pulling up the men's basketball coaching history at utsports.com, and the first coach on record down here actually doesn't have a name. It literally says Coach Unknown. Coach Unknown from 1908 to 1910, 2 seasons. The record was 9-13. That's hilarious. Coach Unknown. Coach Unknown, I'd love to buy you a beer. Well, he's not living anymore, but still, that could have been a collection of people. That could have been players, player coaches, if you will, but I thought that was funny. Anyway, Rick Barnes, 226 wins here at Tennessee, now in his 9th or 10th season, and he is second on the all-time UT wins list. as you mentioned, behind Ray Mears at 278. At 204 is Don DeVoe, and the next closest behind DeVoe, I believe, is John Bender. No, it's Emmett Lowry. Okay, he has 169 wins. So anyway, yeah, I mean, if Rick Barnes coaches a couple more years, then yeah, there's an opportunity to catch Ray Mears for sure. Now, Barnes is, he's not a spring chicken. I don't know how much longer he's going to want to coach. I would assume not an awfully long time, but I don't think that he wants to retire right now. But nobody knows that but Rick Barnes. In terms of, is that something on his radar? Probably not. No. In fact, Tony Vitello joked about John Wilkerson, about how John Wilkerson always says, in his post-game interviews, Tony, with this win, you now did this, and Tony, with this win, you now sit here on the all-time, record list. And he said, John Wilkerson ruins my day when he says that because he's not paying attention to that. I feel like that's kind of like something with Rick Barnes as well. So I can't speak for sure, but I would imagine that's not even on his radar. I think that he could catch him if he coaches a couple more years, though, and hopefully he does. Braden wants to know, would we stand to benefit to have someone in a GM role for our football team like teams across the country are currently doing? Yeah, I think so. Just because Tennessee doesn't have a quote-unquote appointed GM doesn't mean that those tasks that other GMs around the country are doing are not being taken care of. So the work is being done, but I've talked about this before. I mean, if Ohio State's doing it, if Georgia's doing it, if Alabama's doing it, if Oregon's doing it, if all these teams who are having tremendous success the last couple of years are doing it, then why aren't you doing it? Most importantly, though, whoever's in that role has got to be able to tell your head football coach, no, we can't do that. No, we can't do that. No, we can't do that. We cannot pay this player this amount of money. Well, we can't do that. We can't, they have to be able to tell them no, because who in their right mind is going to tell the head football coach no, right? That's kind of interesting with the whole GM conversation. And the GM position is different depending on where you are. Like Andrew Luck is the GM for Stanford. Is his role what the GM at Alabama and Georgia is right now? I don't know, right? Because he's a former letterman. He's a former player and a really good one in that respect. So you've got former managers and former GM, or not GMs, you got former coaches and businessmen and collective representation that are now GMs now for college football. So it's kind of Jim Nagy, Senior Bowl executives, now the GM at Oklahoma. Like, you have guys from all different type of backgrounds. So what is that role defined at your school? I don't necessarily know what that is for Tennessee, but to answer your question, yeah, I think Tennessee should look into that because you know what? It's a copycat league and everybody else is doing it. Why aren't you? The best ride at Dollywood. I haven't been to Dollywood in a hot minute. But that Flying Eagle, the Flying, is that what it's called? The Flying, I know that's not the newest roller coaster. They got a couple of new ones since, but I rode that one a couple years ago, and that was a whole lot of fun. Big roller coaster guy. Okay, so Braden, appreciate you, man. Let's go to Randy. We'll go next to Randy. He said, I'm nervous to even say this out loud, but could this Tennessee basketball team be a team of destiny that gets Coach Barnes to one last Final Four before he rides off into the sunset? Team knows how to win, never gives up, can draw fouls, can make clutch free throws, and no opponent out-toughs them. Yeah, a lot of good points, man. Tennessee got beat on the boards the other day by Alabama. I wouldn't say that, that they weren't tough in that game, though. I mean, sometimes that's just basketball. Hitting clutch free throws like Jemai, man, those were the arguably the bigger plays than his game-winning shots. Team does know how to win. They know how to win in a lot of different ways, and so I can kind of vibe with that a little bit. Offense has got to produce in the tournament, and the fear is Chaz doesn't have a good game, Zakai doesn't have a good game. Like, who's going to step up, right? Jemai did the other day in a big way. At points in time, Jordan Gainey stepped up in a big way, so that's going to be important. But having that win over Alabama, that's good, and it certainly gets you kind of feeling this way. But the number one ranked defensive efficiency team in the country should make you feel that way even more, because Tennessee does that at such an elite level, and that's going to keep them in every single game. So that's going to keep them in every single game. You just need somebody to be making shots on that day, whether it's Jemai Mashak doing what he did, or typically Chaz or Zakai Ziegler, maybe Igor, who did not shoot the basketball very well. Also, I do want to point out one last Final Four, and I know you didn't mean it specifically like this. Rick Barnes only been to one Final Four. Hopefully his second Final Four will be this year, and it will be with a different shade of orange, the right shade of orange, and that being the University of Tennessee. A couple more here. We'll go to Jared. Not bothered much that we're number 2 behind LSU in the D1 baseball poll. But they don't. But I don't like fluctuating the rankings so often. But still, after this weekend, we look good. Does Azuna even have a chance to crack the lineup with how Levi is hitting? Also, what will your kid's name be, and explain why it's going to be Tony V? My son's name is going to be Rowan when he gets here. Alberto Ozuna was denied his preliminary injunction motion on Monday afternoon, which is upsetting. Statement from the lawyer, told me over at VolQuest that essentially they're evaluating their options. He's very disappointed, but they're evaluating what they're going to do next, so we'll see what's there. But that is disappointing. But to your point, even if he was granted injunction, the way Levi Clark's hitting right now, I mean, he ain't coming out of the lineup. Tennessee baseball is ranked number 1 in 4 of the 5 major polls. The poll that I follow, D1 Baseball, who I respect those guys a whole lot, has LSU ahead of Tennessee. I spoke with someone representing D1 Baseball in Houston this week, and I pretty much joked with him. I'm like, hey, you guys got a tough challenge tonight, talking about who's going to be ranked number 1 tomorrow, right? And he laughed, and he was like, well, if it was up to me, it'd be Tennessee. But there's a couple of us to talk about it, obviously. And, LSU was ahead of Tennessee last week, and they went 5-0 this week. So how are we going to punish them? And they played some good competition. But nonetheless, Tennessee is right up there. And, of course, number 1 in the country by 4 of the 5 major polls. Rob, 11 games into this baseball season, what has been your biggest surprise, biggest concern? Who needs to step their game up to hold on to a spot ahead of these talented freshmen? Good question. Biggest surprise is just the domination so far by the newcomers, like Liam Doyle, Levi Clark. Those guys have been fantastic. Jay Abernathy at points in times. Those guys have been, we hear the talk, and people like me who go to scrimmages are telling y'all, like, you've heard the talk, now you're seeing it in games, man. It's really, really cool. Biggest concern, team leaves runners on base. Against the A&Ms, the LSUs, the Arkansas on the schedule, you better come through. And so they left a lot of men on base this past weekend, so that'd be a concern. Who needs to step their game up to hold on to a starting spot? I would say Dalton Bargo, but Jay Abernathy started every game in left field this past weekend. Outside of that, I don't think anybody's in jeopardy of losing a spot. I mean, Cannon's going to catch a ton. I would have said Reese Chapman entering the year, but Reese Chapman's one of your best hitters right now, so. Let me rephrase this. Maybe Marcus Phillips, even though he's done great so far, but like in terms of a starting pitcher, he'll need to continue what he's doing, on into SEC play if he doesn't want to, get moved back to the bullpen. But he's been great so far, so not a whole lot of complaints, whatsoever. We got 2 more. Going to hurry these up here because I know we're running out of time. 2 more. This is from Bruce. I find it highly suspicious that after Coach Eckler leaves for Nebraska, that Nebraska pulls out of the home and home of Tennessee. Is it possible that Coach Eckler told the people at Nebraska they did not want to play Tennessee? No, I don't think so. I think it was simply, Matt Rule pretty much confirmed it when he, last week he ridiculed all the other Big Ten teams for playing big-time out-of-conference games. You need to schedule easier. Follow the Indiana route. You'll get in the college football playoff, especially when it expands to 14 or 16 teams. So I think that's what it was about. They got some answer about how they need more revenue, another home game because of stadium renovations. We can play that game all day at any school in America, right? They wanted an easier schedule, and that's what happened. So I don't think it had anything to do with Egg. But, Bruce, I appreciate you, man. Last one goes to Tyler. So with Twitter Tuesday, with the opening of the schedule now from Nebraska, would you be up to run it back for a Battle of Bristol if we can't find a home and home to fill those spots? I wouldn't mind neutral field if we were doing something really, really interesting like that. This is a good question for a topic on another day, but to answer your question, I would love that. Will it happen for 2026, the first leg of that home and home? No, there's not enough time to plan. We're here in March of 2025. That game would take place in September of 2026. And not enough time to plan. The Battle of Bristol was in motion for a couple of years. But to your point in that regard, like say you do one-offs, maybe you do a one-off in 26 and a one-off in 27. Is there enough time to get that scheduled for 2027? Put it on the books, man. I'd love it, right? That venue, those type of cool environments, I'm with you. I would love a neutral site game if you had something added to that. Don't just go to Atlanta and play. Don't just go to Charlotte and play West Virginia. We've done that so many different times. Don't just go to Atlanta and play Syracuse. Go to a cool venue and play a team that you never see. Sign me up for another Battle of Bristol. I think that would be just awesome. All right, guys, as always, thank you so much for joining us here on today's Locked On Vols. Appreciate you as always, you everydayers. Literally couldn't do this show without you. We'll have Josh Ward for a little Award Wednesday tomorrow. Get you guys set for Tennessee and Ole Miss basketball and whatever is the latest with Tennessee football as spring practice is beginning on Friday. This is Locked On Vols.